Okay, folks, can you hear me at the back? Good. Let's get underway. All right, so this week the topic is managing information security, and I guess I should say up front, this is important stuff, but maybe a little bit, maybe I shouldn't say this because it might put you off, but it's a little bit boring, but important. Okay, so talking about managing information security, this is my plan for today. Talk a little bit about why we need to do that and how we'll go about it. Then we're going to talk about risk management. So that's our first half. Then we'll talk about information security management and some of the standards. So the reason I say this is a little bit boring is because the standards are just large documents. And the reason I say this is really important is if you work in information security, they're the stuff that you need to do. So it's really important that you know about them and you know about what they cover. So if you're going to work in information security in the future, this will be critical, but not overly exciting. But we'll talk about it as we go through in applications as well. So let's get started. Why do we need to manage information security? Well, have a little bit of a list, a read through the list there and think about it. Do you use email? Does it have images in it? Are there links? Do they have attachments? Anyone use cloud services? I know you're using mobile devices because quite a lot of you have them here. Portable data storage. All of those things have risk associated with it. Do you use the internet? Of course, that's all of us. Do online banking? Online shopping? Anyone keep an eye on the weather? Anyone check the conditions outside before they came to uni today? Find out how many protesters you'd have to step around to get onto campus? So you might look at the news. How about online gaming? Is there anybody here that has that sort of passing interest? Oh, we're trying to look serious. No one's going to admit it. All right, what about travel and holidays? You book stuff online? Do you use What If? No? TripAdvisor? Yeah? So all sorts of places you might go. Maps. Anyone use Google Maps? Search engine? Google again? Anyone use a different search engine? Keep your hand up if it's Bing. Sorry, shouldn't joke. Socials. Okay, what about installing software? Or an app on your phone? So there's lots of things that we do all the time that maybe involve a little bit of risk for your information assets. Okay, so if we're going to manage information security, there are some things that we should think about. It'd be good to be a little bit systematic about it. First of all, what actually are your information assets? So what is it that you would need to protect? And where are they located? So if you're in the toots today, you know that your home Wi-Fi password may not just be at home, right? It might be stored in all sorts of places, on all sorts of devices, in various apps or whatever. So what are your assets? Where are they? What are they worth? Okay, why do you have to protect them? What sort of threats are they facing? And if they were damaged, how bad would it be? All right, is there something you could do to mitigate that threat? So can you protect your asset? What would you need to do that? How much will it cost? How hard is it to do? How much expertise do you need for that? So these are all things to think about. So what if you don't protect them? If something bad happens, what could that cost? So these are the kind of questions to think about for information security management. The point down the bottom is you can't protect every asset against every threat. You don't have enough money and you don't have enough time or expertise. So you have to make some trade-offs. But that's okay, because you do this kind of thing all the time, risk management. Some of it you do casually, maybe in an ad hoc way. Some of it you might be a little bit more strategic about or have a more managed process. But that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so I'm going to start off with risk. If you look for a definition in the dictionary, it says a risk is a situation involving exposure to danger, or the possibility that something unpleasant will happen, or a person or thing regarded as a threat or likely source of danger. So there's some definitions of risk. So let's have a think about it. Do anything risky? Anyone cross the street without waiting for the little traffic light to give you the green man signal? It's a bit risky, isn't it? What do you do before you cross the street if you're not going to wait for the signal? There's not much traffic and it's far enough away, I reckon I could run across. So you do things. Yep. We're going to talk about that sort of process for information assets. I picked these two pictures because they've got a few things in common. What's the really obvious thing in common? Your colour. Which colour? Yeah, and what does that colour get used for? Safety warning. Look at this, pay attention to this. This is a dangerous situation. So let's look at this one here. Anyone live on the south side? All right, this is just a photo of Deshan Street at Coorparoo. If you know Deshan Street at all, it's a bit low-lying, and if there's a lot of rain or any decent high tide, bits of that go underwater. But you might have seen signs like this before around where you live. Now, there's a road, there's a sign. It says no entry, road closed, water over road. If you really wanted to, can you drive past the sign? Easy to go around it? Okay. So, if you go around the sign, are you putting yourself in danger? Or your passengers, maybe. So you might, have a death wish yourself. Okay, so maybe you can go around because that's not much of a barrier, just this little bit here. Drive down there, water over the road. Well, what kind of danger is it? What happens when there's water over the road and you drive into it? Oh, you guys are hard work. What could happen? Your car could get washed off the road in the floodwaters? You heard stories like that before? Okay. What else could happen? Maybe there's a big pothole in the road because it's been washed out and you drive into it, do a bit of damage to your car. What about the sign's been there for a while and the water's gone and you can just keep driving and nothing bad happens? Possible? Okay. How about this one over here? A website wants to open web content using this program on your computer. How many people just go, allow? So there's the big warning. Here's the big warning. You're going to think about this one, but this one, nah, it's okay. What could happen? Don't know? All right. So this is what we're going to talk about, first of all, risk. If we look in the Australian Standard, and I'll talk a bit more about the standards later on, because you do need to know that they exist and roughly what they cover, it actually says risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So the effect, that means it's not the same all the time. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. It's, there can be some variation. All right? The deviation could be positive, better than you expect. Could be negative, worse than you expect. All right? So effect of uncertainty means we don't really know. Something might happen here and it might be good, it might be bad, might be really, really bad, not quite sure. On objectives. Information security, what are our objectives likely to be? Yeah, we'd be thinking the CIA stuff, right? And it depends on what the assets are, how much they might be worth and what we might have to worry about. So when we start thinking about our objectives, we might have to think about things like, if this goes badly wrong, how much will it cost? Yeah, the finances. If this goes badly wrong, is someone going to get hurt? Are we going to have reputational damage? Will this cause damage to the environment? And all of that depends on what the systems are, of course. So risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, and somehow we want to try and manage that uncertainty. The part down the bottom says you can apply this at different levels: organisational, project, product or process. You guys have an assessment task. Remember we talked in the first week about assessment, and we said you had to do mid-semester and final exams, and then you had some problem-solving tasks. So there's the weekly online quizzes that you're doing, and there's also a report. Did we lose volume then? You've got to write a little report about your mobile phone security. Mobile phone. Okay, we'll keep an eye on that volume, see what happens. Okay, so when we're talking about risk and we're thinking about information security, we can break that up into the consequences and likelihood. So consequence is, what's the outcome? How bad is it going to be? And likelihood is, how likely is it to happen? What's the chance that this will happen? So they're the two sort of components there. So likelihood, what's the chance of this happening? Consequence, what will be the outcome if this happens? And then there is a magnitude. It's going to cost us money. Is it going to cost us, $10, $100, $100 million? So that would be magnitude. There's a little point here, though, that says the perception of magnitude is defined by stakeholder perspective. So let's just think about one number, $1,000. $1,000 gone from a bank account. Two perspectives. You, the student who has the bank account. $1,000 gone. Is it a big deal? Yes. The bank. $1,000 gone from your account. Is it a big deal? It's the same amount of money. Different perspectives, different impact. So that's an interesting angle on it there. It's useful to think about other perspectives than your own. We're interested in security, so when we're thinking about consequences and events, the ones that we worry the most about are the ones that are nasty, because we would really like to prevent that happening. This is just a diagram summing up stuff that we've already talked about. So if you like a picture, this is for you, and otherwise you probably already know this stuff. So we have threats, things with potential to cause harm. We have vulnerabilities. If the threat acts on the vulnerability, we'll have some kind of event. The event will happen with some likelihood, some chance, and it'll have some consequence. And we're going to say risk is when we put all that together. Okay? For organisations, they might call this a business risk. We might just call it risk. So when we are talking in this class, we won't say what's the risk of this for the likelihood of the event. We'll say likelihood. We will use risk for this end result. Okay, so when we're talking negative events, what do we mean? Well, simple things. No power. Okay? And we said this could happen, the scope of this could be various. Could be no power to your laptop because, the battery's run out and you didn't bring a charging cable. So it might be that, or it might be no power to Z-Block, or it might be no power to the CBD. So things like that. Communication system failure. Telstra outage. Maybe something like that. Is it local? Is it just your street? Is it just your house? Did you forget to pay the bill, they cut you off? Or did someone dig up a cable and, wipe out a suburb? Negative event, losing access to your data. Maybe you lost access to it because you got hit with ransomware. Or maybe you lost access to it because you have it with a cloud storage provider who's just gone broke and overnight disappeared. Can happen. Theft of intellectual property. Someone stole the secret sauce recipe. Public disclosure of confidential information. I put a few examples. This one you'll recognise from the chute. Okay? So remember we were talking about the bug bounty programs and who might pay the big bucks. And the WikiLeaks stuff in 2017 showed that CIA had a whole heap of exploits that they had stored away, and that became public. It's probably things they didn't want you to know. Equifax, anyone heard of Equifax? So it's a credit reporting agency. So you're not directly their customer, but organisations that you would deal with will be the customer. So if you maybe want to get a phone plan or buy a car and get a car loan and they're going to get a credit report done on you, it's an agency like Equifax that does that. So they store heaps of your information, a lot of financial and personal information. They had a massive breach not long ago. This one's in Singapore. Is anyone here from Singapore? Okay, so the Ministry of Health over there had a breach. Someone made public the HIV status of people in treatment there, about 14,000 people. Oops. So sometimes things like that happen. We would say a negative event, right? Especially if you're one of the people that's named in the list. Might not have been stuff that you want everyone to know. Okay, so in this diagram we were saying threats act on vulnerability. That results in some kind of negative event. Okay, so the threats act on an entity via vulnerability, some characteristic. It might be a flaw, like some of the stuff that we looked at in the tutes for the software vulnerabilities, problem in the code, or it might just be a characteristic of the item. So if you need to use a computer for something and it requires electricity, if you can shut off the power supply, then that device doesn't work anymore. Okay? So there might be a vulnerability that gets exploited, and that might just be the first of many things that could happen in a chain. All right? So thinking about the smart light bulb situation that we talked about in the tutes today, suppose you have your smart lights, your app on your iPad, and your iPad doesn't have any kind of lock code. Okay? So first weakness, you leave it somewhere. No physical protection. You left it there, that's a vulnerability. Maybe when you go back it's still there and nothing happened to it. But maybe someone got to it before you got there. Okay? Doesn't have a lock screen. That's a vulnerability. That can be exploited because someone can just get in and rummage through your files. All right? The app in there for the smart light, stored your Wi-Fi password in plain text. That's a vulnerability. Someone can get to that, find out your Wi-Fi password. If they can get to your Wi-Fi and they have the password, we could go on with a whole chain of events there. All right. So last week with Xavier, you would have talked about threats. The source could be natural or it could be human action. So it could be all sorts of things, you know, floods or earthquakes or tsunamis or all sorts of actions that can be damaging and can have consequences. Or human action, it could be the accidents people make, choosing the wrong thing in a menu, drop-down menu, send your email to the wrong person, send a reply to everyone when it's only supposed to go to one person, spam a whole heap of people with confidential information. So it could be something like that. Or stuff that you didn't do when you should have. Or, yeah. So there's lots of things that are accidental. Deliberate things. So someone on purpose does something that will damage information assets. Now we're getting into the area that we would say attacks. Okay, remember the attacks, deliberate action intended to cause harm. Well, when we start thinking about that, how bad can it be? It depends on the motivation and the capability of the attacker. If it's the kid next door that you've annoyed, They might be pretty motivated, but they might have limited capability. But if it is the CIA or some nation state, they might be pretty motivated and have pretty large capability. So that's something to think about. So the point there is, if you're a target, someone, a determined attacker with capability will find a way in, and it might require physical access, or it might be a technical thing. So maybe it exploits some software vulnerability. It might be about the processes that you use, or it could be something that exploits vulnerable people. So the phishing email or phone call, and someone gives away information that's a starting point. I put the last point down here because this is really important. A lot of people go, I don't need to do anything because, you know, who would be interested in me? I'm not going to be a target. But you guys are really actually quite valuable in lots of ways. You might not even be the end game, but you might be a stepping stone to that. So someone might want to compromise your accounts, not because it's yours, but because they can use it to do something else. In terms of identity theft, you guys are perfect because most of you are pretty young and you don't have a bad credit rating yet. So that means your identity could still be used to get a nice big loan. Of course, if someone steals your identity to get a loan, they're really, really unlikely to pay the loan back for you. All right, but that's stuff to think about. Okay, how do we manage risk? Well, we can't get rid of every vulnerability. Some of them we don't even know about yet. Okay, but we have to try and work out what's the process for working out, you know, of things we know, which are going to have the worst consequences, which are the most likely, you know, that sort of thing, and deal with those. So deal with the obvious problems. If it's an organisation, they should have some kind of systematic and continual risk management process for information security. And there is a process. You don't have to invent this process yourself. You don't have to spend ages in brainstorming workshops to try and figure out what to do. There is a process and it's already documented. Best practice for information security risk management for us is in an Australian standard, and the standard has this number, 27005, and it's 2012. The last part is just the year that it got issued. The AS is for Australian standard, the NZS is for New Zealand standard. It's the same standard, okay? And it's actually the same as the ISO, the international standard, with the same number. All right, so there is a standard, information security risk management. It's a process to follow. We're going to talk about that, and in your mobile phone security analysis, you're basically going to follow the process for that. But instead of an organisation and an information system, it's you and your mobile phone. That's the scope. Okay, this standard 27005, it's part of a series of Australian standards. Some of the other ones in that series are 27001 and 27002, and I'll talk a little bit about those later on, but we'll concentrate on this risk management one first of all. Now, all of these Australian standards documents and all the other Australian standards are actually available to you for free through QUT's library, through the database, for QUT students, for use as, you know, part of your study. So you've got free access to the standards. Normally these cost hundreds of dollars, so that's something where you can get a little bit of value for your money that you're shelling out to be enrolled in the course. There is a restriction on it. The restriction is that this access to the standards online that QUT has only allows 4 concurrent accesses. So if 4 people are logged in, no one else can log in. Now, it's not 4 accesses to each standard, it's 4 accesses to the database. So that's a really tight limit. Best thing to do is get on it at an unpopular time, log in, find the standard you want, download it onto your device, and log out. And that frees that connection up for someone else to use. Okay? If you're studying other stuff, this is not just information security standards. There are heaps of other standards there for all sorts of things, building, furniture design, vehicles, whatever you can think of. So it's a really good resource. You should make use of it, but it might be tricky from time to time. Okay, so this is pretty much... I'll cover in the lectures enough stuff, I think, to give you a feel for it. If you're going to be working in this area, you really should look at the standards documents yourself pretty thoroughly. The other thing is just it's good to know that they exist because they do get updated over time. So in 5 years' time, if you're doing something you think, oh, I remember she talked about that standard, I wonder, get a copy of the current version and have a look at that. So it should cover similar things but be a bit more recent. All right, so when you look at this diagram, probably the first thing you notice is a heap of blue boxes and a heap of black arrows. I'm just going to give you a minute to have a look. Tell me when you find the start box. Just put your hand up when you find the start box. Yep. No, it's not. It's a good try, though. Yep, the back there. Nope. Yeah. Okay. It's a trick question because there's no start box. But that's a good place to start. You can start in some of the other places. There's no actual start for this. What you'll notice is that and there's no stop, right? All of this is cyclic. This is all cycles. But let's start up here because it's the top of the page, right? Context establishment. Establish the context for your risk management process. For you guys, that'll be your mobile phone. But what's the context around that? What do you use it for? You know, what's your social network? So there's a bit to look at there. Once you've got an idea of the context, do a risk assessment. And the box here, which you pointed out, the risk assessment box there, includes 3 things. It includes risk identification. What are the risks? Risk analysis. Okay, let's analyse them. How bad are they? Risk evaluation. In this context establishment, we should set up some criteria that says this is the level of risk that we're comfortable with. When we do this evaluation, we can make a comparison. Is this what we're comfortable with, or is it worse? Do I need to actually do something about it? So that gets you to a decision point. Okay, we've done that risk assessment. Are we good with what we found? And if the answer is yes, we can go, okay, well, let's think about the treatments we could apply. And if the answer is no, we go, oh, let's revisit that. Okay, cycle back through. Risk treatments. Okay, we've decided on some things. Are we okay with that? Yep. Then we'll accept residual risk. And that gets us to the end of our first run through. No, go back around. But even when you get to that point, you don't stop. You're still cycling through. So this is a continuous cycle, this process. Okay? So context, risk assessment, which is those 3 things, identification, analysis, evaluation. Apply a treatment. Decide, are we good with that or do we need to do more? 2 things, 1 down each side. Risk communication and consultation. And then down this side, risk monitoring and review. So this one, the risk treatment feeds into this, risk monitoring and review. But risk communication and consultation, this is a bit different. What's different about these arrows? There's something different with these 3 arrows compared to all the other ones in the diagram. I can see people going like this and like this. Use your hands and give a little signal, no words. What's different about these arrows? Yeah, okay, good. So everything else here says follow this process, go in this order, you know, from this to this to this, go this way, one-way street. This is both ways. Communication and consultation. So communicate with people, consult with them, listen to what they're telling you, right? Two-way communication there. You tell them what you're doing, what you're planning, they tell you what they think about that or give you some feedback, and pay attention to it, it'll matter. Okay, so let's have a bit more of a detailed look at those steps. So establishing the context, some of the things to think about is what's the relationship between the organisation and the external environment. So if it's you and the mobile phone stuff, what's your relationship, you and the world around you? You're a student here at QUT, maybe you're an employee somewhere as well, you have connections to your family, friends and so on. Internal context, in your organisation, what are they trying to do? What are their capabilities? What are the goals? What are the objectives? And then for risk management, what are the goals and objectives and so on there? We'll have a look at some of those when we talk about the standards a bit later too. Risk criteria, okay. What are we comfortable with? If we're evaluating the risk, what information assets are we talking about? Are they of strategic importance? Are they critical for the organisation? So if it's you and your mobile phone, think about aspects of that. Do you have any apps installed on your phone that you would say are critical? So if you didn't have them, couldn't function? Any particular software on your phone that's critical? Definitely operating system, right? So it's not very good without that. There might be some other things. So criticality, how essential is it? Legal, regulatory and contractual obligations. So is there a legal requirement for you to do something with this particular information asset? So for example, it could be privacy legislation requires you to protect some personal information that you might have. So that example of the HIV register being published in Singapore, if something like that happened in Australia, that would be a serious breach. Wow, we're a bit glitchy in here today. All right, let's see how we go. Impact evaluation, well, we have to think about it. What's the level of classification of the asset? So is it something with sensitive information? Is it a critical thing? Are we talking about a breach of confidentiality? Is it integrity? Is it availability? How much impact will that have on our business? So will it just mean things run a bit slower, or does it mean we can't do anything at all? So for example, the supermarkets, remember the Telstra outage and the FPOS machines weren't working? What happens in a supermarket when that happens? You could still pay cash, but how many people have cash? So they can continue their business, but it's significantly disrupted. Yeah. What if you're an online betting company and it is the day of the Melbourne Cup and you get hit with ransomware? Serious to the business? Pretty much. So there's that sort of thing. Risk acceptance, if we're going to do something, what level of risk can we tolerate in the organisation? And what are the timeframes? And that's not the same answer for everything, all right? It might vary for different assets and different areas of the business. Okay, now we're talking about this grey box here. So we're just going to run through these 3 steps in here. So risk identification, what are the things that can happen, where and when? So what are the assets? Where's your information? What are some of the threats to it? Do you have anything in place already to deal with that? So what are your existing controls? What are the vulnerabilities? We've already talked about QUT being here on the edge of the river. Beautiful, vulnerable to flooding. Work out some events and possible potential consequences. How could things happen? What are the causes? What are the scenarios? How could you do this? Well, if you're not really sure, you might be able to run through a checklist. And when we talk about the other standards, 27002 will be a good one to use for that. You might have your own experience. We were here when it flooded, we know that could happen. In these buildings, Z and C and S block, the whole first floor, the car parking lot, was completely underwater. The water came up to the bottom of the second floor. So all the stuff that used to be down the bottom for the lifts and power and so on, that got trashed. All of that's on the next floor up now. So they made a decision and they acted on it based on the experience. It wasn't good. Sometimes bad things happen to other people, and hopefully you can learn from their mistakes and put something in place before the bad thing happens to you. So you're learning from experience. It doesn't always have to be your own experience. It can be, yeah, that happened there. We have that same vulnerability. Let's do something about it before that nasty thing happens here. Last point there says include all risks whether they're under control of the organisation or not, right? Even if you can't prevent it, at least know about it. So this is about being informed. So the middle part is risk analysis, and this is where you are working out, yeah, how bad is this thing going to be? There's a couple of ways to go about it. The two main approaches, I know you're thinking two, there's three on the slide. Two main things are qualitative and quantitative. All right, and I put a big warning down here for this one, semi-quantitative. I'll talk about that in a minute, but let's talk about qualitative first. So qualitative, when we're talking about the risks, we will use descriptive scales and the categories will be ordered. I'll show you what I mean by that. So if we're talking about the consequence, we would say, this is, minor or inconvenient. This is moderate, this is major, this is catastrophic. They might be categories. So they're in order from not much to terrible, but it's not a numeric scale. It's just categories, right? If we were talking about likelihood, so how likely is this thing to happen, we might use ordered categories and label them with words. This is rare, this is unlikely, this is possible, this is likely, this is almost certain. Okay, so that's what qualitative means. We've got ordered categories, they're labelled with words. Quantitative analysis, we use numerical values. So if we were talking about consequence, we might say, this would cost, $1 to repair the damage, or $10,000, or, $2 million. Or we might talk about, this will be the number of hours of labour to recover this system. Or it might be the number of days we are going to be unable to use this device. So it's a numerical value. Likelihood, numerical value again, but this one you probably remember from high school. It's a probability value, and they go from 0 to 1, where 0 means this thing will never happen, and 1 means this thing is certain to happen. Everything else is somewhere in between then. If we wanted to write it as a percentage, 0 is still 0, and 100%, that's 1. Yep, this is certain. Everything else is somewhere in there. Now the last one that I put a big warning on, this is where you're using qualitative analysis, so you've got these scales with ordered categories. It might be minor, moderate, major, catastrophic. And then, because it's nice and easy to combine things if you've got a formula, we just put a number. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, it's pretty simple. I put a huge warning on this because when you do that and assign the numerical values, you are actually imposing some assumptions. If we go 1, 2, 3, 4, we're saying the difference between this and this is 1 to 2. So the difference between minor to moderate, that's the same as the difference between 3 and 4, major to catastrophic. Well, that might not be true. So a big warning on that, okay? Use this one with caution. Anyway, that's the types of things we're talking about. Qualitative, we've got qualities that we're talking about here, words describing it. Quantitative, we've got quantities, it's numbers. All right, how do we combine those? Well, and I apologise for this slide because it's a bit annoying. We could have our categories insignificant. We can just deal with this as part of our routine business operations. Minor. Well, it does affect our service, but we can deal with it. Moderate. We're going to have to review things. It won't be the normal service. It'll be somehow a little bit different. Major. Yeah, this is not good. We can't do everything that we normally would. This is going to cost money. So that's an example, all right? These are not definitions, but this is an example of ordered categories. The least consequence is at the bottom there, the worst consequence is at the top there. So you can see that that is increasing consequence as we go up. Now, if we're talking about likelihood, what can we do? We could say, oh, it's pretty unlikely. Well, this is possible. Yeah, maybe. Or highly likely. And you can see again that that goes up. So how do we combine the consequence and the likelihood when they're just ordered categories? Simple way, make a table. So we've got consequence here, we've got categories, likelihood here. Now let's think about what it means. If you are in this box down the bottom, this thing is very unlikely to happen, and if it does happen, the consequence is insignificant. Is that a big risk? No. Let's think about this corner over here. This is highly likely, and it is a major consequence. Big risk? So, that's something that we really should be doing something about if we can, right? And then, yeah, that sort of tails off. So we know it's easy to spot this is the corner of low risk, don't even worry about it, and this is the corner of think about this because this could be a pretty serious problem you might have to deal with really soon, do something about it. The in-between is a bit tougher. Okay, if it's quantitative, well, numbers, we can just use a formula. So sometimes we can get numerical values for likelihood and consequence. So you might know how likely something is to happen. How likely is it that we will get a flood here in this particular location? We might be able to get historical data that supports that. How much would this thing cost? Hardware or whatever. You could get that. If you know the value of the assets and you know what percentage damage will be caused by a particular threat occurrence or an event happening, you can figure out what the cost will be. So we can do some calculations. So if we know the asset value and we know how damaged it'll be in one occurrence of the event, we can just multiply those and get an expected value of the loss. The annualised loss expectancy is how much does it cost if it happens once, multiplied by how many times would we expect it to happen in a year, and that's what we'd expect the cost of this to be in a year. I put a big red warning on this as well because this is multiplying two numbers. It's easy to do, that calculation. Just get your calculator out or use your spreadsheet or whatever. That's an easy calculation to do, but what does it really mean? If you know exactly the value of the asset and you can figure out how likely things are to happen, that'll be good. But if you don't know and you're just guessing, you're just multiplying two guesses. So your answer's just rubbish, right? So I put that sort of caution here. Sometimes if you're doing qualitative analysis, unless you're sure of your numbers, if you're doing quantitative analysis, if you're not sure of the numbers, you might be better off just doing qualitative analysis, just lumping them into categories. Okay, this is an example if you are going to do some quantitative analysis, so with the numbers, maybe your asset is some trust or reputational. You're worried about confidential customer data being made public after some unauthorised intrusion into your database. So there's plenty of examples of that. The HIV one before is that kind of example. It would damage your reputation. You have to do some cleanup. You might have to compensate your clients or customers that are affected, so there'll be financial cost of that as well. So let's suppose we know the asset value, it's $5 million. We know after this event that it is going to decrease by about 1%. So we can work out 1% of $5 million, that's $50,000. If this kind of thing happens twice a year, it's going to cost us about $100,000 a year just to deal with this one problem, right? So if you can work things like that out, then you could say, okay, well, how much can we spend on controls to deal with this? Could we stop this happening? And how much does that cost? If it cost $5,000, would it be worth it? Yeah. If it cost $250,000, would it be worth it? If your criteria, so if your risk criteria is only financial, you'd have to say no. But you might have other criteria, so that's worth thinking about in the context, right? All right, so in risk evaluation, basically you're comparing what you just worked out in the risk analysis with what your criteria is that you set at the start. And then you'll say, okay, well that's, I'm prepared to wear that, or that's no good, we need to apply some treatment. So by the time you get to the end of risk assessment, you should have a list of the risks that need some action, and you can prioritise them. We're going to deal with that one first, and then that one, and then that one. All right? What's the most urgent thing? What's the high or the extreme risk? We're going to have to do something about that straight away. Oh, this is low risk. Well, just forget that for now. We'll keep an eye on it, we'll monitor, but we don't need to do anything just now. So you did decide to take some risk treatment. Here are some strategies you can do. Risk avoidance, stop doing the activity that gives rise to the risk. Okay, so if it's about your customer information that's been released somewhere, do you need to collect that? If it's a loyalty program and you've got, all your customers' dates of birth and you send them a little, hey, happy birthday message, do you really need to do that? You could maybe just not have that information at all, and then you don't have to worry about protecting it. Or if you're not going to avoid it, can you change it somehow? Can you change the likelihood, make it more or less likely? Hopefully less. Can you change the consequences? So even if it happens, it's not quite as damaging. Can you share the risk with someone else? And you guys probably do this for other risks. Anyone here have a car? Do you have insurance? Yep. So you're sharing the risk there. You're going, oh, if I'm in a bingle and I run into that Merc, I don't want to pay for that. So I'm prepared to pay this little bit of money to the insurance company every year so that if that thing happens, they'll wear the cost. Yep. So you're transferring it, you're making it someone else's problem. It's not for free. So that's the sharing of risk. Risk retention, you know about it. It's not like, oh, I didn't see that coming. You know about it, but you decide to accept that risk. All right, this is an example from December last year. The Marriott Hotel, you've heard of that chain? So they bought an existing hotel chain called Starwood, and that Starwood was supposedly exclusive and it had a loyalty program, so it had lots of customer information for the kind of customers that pay a lot of money to stay at posh hotels. Unfortunately, that Starwood database was already breached before the Marriott bought it. I think it got breached in 2014, and unfortunately, the Marriott got a big fine. There's privacy protection in Europe that imposes significant fines, and in Australia now as well. We'll talk more about privacy later in the semester. So they had a big fine that they had to pay. It was something like £100 million, I think. So not little. Could they have done anything to make this less likely? A breach of their database. So could they have had physical access controls? Could they have had technical controls in place? What about the policy and so on? Could they have reduced the consequence? And again, those sorts of things. Could you take insurance policy out for this? You can. There is cyber insurance that's available. Or do you just wear the risk? So there's lots of different things to think about there. Okay, so when you are deciding on your risk treatment of those different options that we talked about here, avoid it, modify it, share it with someone else, or retain it, think about, okay, does that reduce the risk a lot or just a little bit? And do we get any extra benefit? Sometimes if you put a risk treatment in place for one risk, it might actually benefit across a number of other ones as well. So you can get quite a lot of benefit. Sometimes if you put a treatment option in place for one risk, it actually makes something else worse, or it permits a different attack that you hadn't thought of. So one example for this, there was a Does anyone use a high school laptop loan program? Does anyone have a school where they let you borrow the laptops to take home? Yeah, a few? So there was a college in the US that had a similar system to that. All the students got given a laptop to use. The laptops had, the IT people in the school could remotely access the webcam in the laptops, and they did this for security so that if the laptop was stolen, they could remotely activate the webcam, see who was using the laptop, and hopefully, if it was a known offender, that could be recovered. That was the thinking. What happened in this school was that the parents of a child in the school got a phone call, please come down, come in and see us, and the admin at the school said, look, we're a bit concerned because we think your child's involved with drug use. And the parents said, well, what makes you think that? And they said, oh, well, on the webcam. And the parents said, oh, hang on a minute. The laptop's not stolen. Why would you be remotely activating the webcam? We're talking about high school kids who are very likely to be using these laptops, I don't know, at home, in their personal space. So the thing that was meant to be a risk treatment, let's have access to the webcams remotely so that if this bad thing happens we can recover them, actually turned out to be a problem, right? So you have to be aware that when you introduce a treatment, you might be introducing a new risk. Okay, this is just about your which treatments should we take. And this graph is really it's a bit weird, but it's easy to understand. Over here we've got the level of risk. So is this a really high level risk or is this a low level risk? And along the bottom we've got what's the cost of reducing the risk. This is a low cost and this is a high cost. So basically, if you've got something that doesn't cost much, but you can use it to treat some high level of risk, that's a good thing to do, you should do it. Or it might be something as simple as if you're storing the passwords for the home Wi-Fi networks, store them encrypted. Right? Doesn't cost a lot of money and can really deal with an issue. If you've got something that will just make a small change to the level of risk, like reduce it just a little bit, but it costs a lot to do, it's probably not worth it. But there's no clear boundary between those. So it's sort of you have to weigh that up. Okay, when you're doing risk treatment, you should keep some documentation about this. What is it that you're going to do? What resources does it require? Who will be responsible for it? When's it going to be done? How will you know if it's working? So how can you determine the effectiveness? And what's going to be reported back? If you put this in place and it reduces the risk, but there's still some remaining risk there, is that now below your risk criteria? Is that okay? Or do you have to do something else? So do you have to go back through the loop again and revisit that? All right, the communication and consultation, we already said this is the double-ended arrow part. So you need to, at each step of the risk management process, think about communicating to stakeholders. And I put down here the definition in the standard for stakeholders. This is really worth paying careful attention to. It might not be what you think. Some people think we mean shareholders. That's not it. So stakeholders, those people and organisations who may be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activity. What does perceive themselves to be affected? What does that mean? Yeah? Yeah, they think they're affected. Whether they're affected or not, they think they are. That makes them a stakeholder in the process. So that's the definition. Internal stakeholders, people within your organisation who are going to be affected or affect others or think they're going to be affected. External stakeholders, so people outside your organisation who are going to be affected or think they're going to be affected or may affect others. So you need to tell them what risk management decisions you're making and why you're doing it so that they understand and they don't counteract it. And you should listen to feedback you get, so consult, because they'll let you know if you've made a stupid decision that's not going to work. Well, hopefully they will. So it's really important. It's two-way communication, and it happens throughout the risk management process. It's not just when you get to the end you check and see. The risk monitoring and review, you have to keep monitoring in the risk management process. You want to monitor the risks you identified, because over time things change. The likelihood might change or the consequence might change. So, for example, if you're worried about stuff like ransomware, 10 years ago, not really a thing. 2 years ago, huge. So likelihood can change over time. What's the effectiveness of your risk treatment plan? How are you going about managing this? So what's your system that controls the implementation of your risk treatment plan? That's identified risks. What about new ones? Do you have any new assets? So think about how they're going to be affected. Have you modified asset values? So are things worth more now or worth less now? And who would they be of value to? So maybe you've got some really good new bit of hardware, big fast system. That might be really attractive to, I don't know, someone doing mining, Bitcoin miners. They might be interested in that. So you have to think of a lot of different things there. So yeah, the value of your assets might go up, it might go down. New threats could be related to increased interconnection of systems. So this is a big issue now for industrial control systems, where they all used to be isolated, but now a lot of them are connected to the internet. So things that used to happen in an isolated system, you had to actually be there. Now you can do that remotely. Maybe it's new technologies, you know, changing to a wireless network, or changing to whatever it's going to be, something voice activated. Could be machine learning stuff. All sorts of different things would change threats. And this last part is, you know, it's sensible, but most people don't do this very well. Keep a record of it. So if you made assumptions, write them down. Where did your information come from? Keep track of all of that. If you made a decision, why did you make that decision? Because remember, this is an iterative process, and when you go back and revisit that, maybe some of this is still true, or maybe you can find out what's changed there. If you're keeping records, you think about what the legal requirements are for that and your business needs. What's the cost of creating and maintaining the records? And yeah, you could benefit from reusing the information. Of course, if you're keeping records, then you need to consider who has access to those. So if they get altered, will you know? Okay, I'm going to stop there. We can take a break until... I think we'll take a break until 10 past, and then we'll do a little bit more. So get up and have a walk around, stretch your legs, go and grab a coffee or something. All right. All right, let's do this second half. So the little bit I'm going to talk about now is about the Australian standards for information security. So basically there are three that we will refer to in the semester. 27001, and that's about information security management systems. So really you'd only be interested in this if you're part of an organisation that's trying to set up an information security management system. 27002, that's a code of practice. That's interesting for everyone, whether it's an organisation or an individual. That's a really good one to use, like a checklist for, you know, are these sensible things? Have I thought about everything that I should for this particular situation? 27005, that's the risk management one that we just talked about. Okay, that process for risk management applied to information security. There's a couple of extra bits with it. It's got a really good appendices at the back that talk about threats and vulnerabilities and give lots of good examples. So if you're interested in information security in your future and your employment, and it is a growth area, lots of jobs, then that's worth taking a look at all of these basically in detail. These are all the same as the international standards, so ISO means international standard. So even though I'll talk about the Australian standard, because that's the ones you can access for free through QUT's library access to the Standards Australia, that's the same essentially as these international standards. There are some that are a little bit newer. Normally you'll see by the difference in the years there. So usually the international standard gets updated and then a year or two later the Australian standards get updated. They do change over time, so it is worth looking for the newest one. Americans don't generally use the ISO standards as much. They have an organisation called the National Institute for Standards and Technology. Everyone calls it NIST. It's a national institute in the US, but a lot of people globally will look at NIST communications. They have a whole heap of things called special publications, so that SP just means special publications, and they have a heap on computer security. So there's a list there of some of the things that you might look at. So the NIST stuff is worth going to. A lot of their stuff is accessible from their website, so that's a nice plus as well. There are some other information security standards that will be used in industry. PCI DSS, that's Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. That's really common. In payment card, we're talking about, Visa, MasterCard, that sort of thing. So if you're processing that kind of card information, there's a series of things that you need to do. And if you violate this, then the Visa or MasterCard or whatever might just go, yeah, no, you're not a payment gateway anymore. You can't be trusted with this. So there are also some state government level, so information standards that are used at various state government levels. Australian Signals Directorate, ASD, they have an information security manual. They also have some publicly available stuff, strategies to mitigate cyber security incidents, and I'm going to direct you in the tutes to have a look at that. So we won't worry too much about that now, but yeah, the Essential 8, that's fairly well known too in industry. You'll hear people talking about Essential 8, and that's what they mean, the ASD stuff. Okay, but for the rest of this lecture, we're going to concentrate on these. Okay. Why do you want to use the Information Security Management Standards? It shows that in your organisation they have some commitment to information security. They're actually thinking about it. If you are cooperating, trading or exchanging information to other organisations, or they're somewhere in your supply chain, it tells them how you go about, what your information security practices are, what you've got in place. If you work in an organisation, then at least you think, oh, they're trying to do security properly. I probably won't get the blame for a heap of stuff that I haven't done or whatever. And probably a very valuable one for all of us is it's a checklist of things. Should I be doing this? What's the sensible stuff? It's meant to be like a best practice guide. Okay, who uses the standards? Australian Cybersecurity Survey, which Cert Australia used to do from time to time, and we don't have Cert Australia now because they've been sucked into part of ASD, but they used to have this brochure, and in their survey 82% of organisations use external information security standards, and 85% of those use 27001. So that's ISO, but it's the same as the AS 27001. So the ones we'll talk about are ones that are relatively widely used and well known in industry. Okay, how do you know if an organisation is managing their security? If you are using AS 27001, that's about information security management systems, you can actually be certified as complying with that standard. You actually have to pay for that though, the certification. So it's a bit like getting the ticks. In this series 2700, we said 1, 2 and 5. 27001 is the only one that you can get certified against in Australia. Not many organisations, 400 or 500 organisations in Australia have that, and in the world it's less than 40,000. So not a lot of organisations globally get certified, but some do. You can still get the standard and use it, but not pay for someone to come and audit you and say that you are compliant. So there might be more organisations following this than are actually certified. But yeah, if someone is certified, it means they have an information security management system that follows this standard exactly. All right, well, what's in the standard? Let's have a bit of a look. So 27001, it's an approach to information security management, and it says what you need to do, so specifies requirements for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving an information security management system within your organisation. So it's written in a generic way. It doesn't matter if your organisation is a large one or a small one. It doesn't matter whether you are working in the finance industry or whether you're in education or waste management or whatever. So it's a generic thing. All the organisations can apply the process. It's really about the information security management process. And external and internal parties can assess your compliance with this. That's why they can certify against it. So it says how to manage your information security management system. That's the management process, how you'll manage it. It doesn't say what you'll actually do, what controls will you put in place. All of that stuff's in 27002. So that has all the controls, and you can choose the controls from 27002 that you want to implement. Okay, so if we were looking in 27001, the document, it talks about the scope and defines the terms and so on, and then this is what it's about. What's the context for your organisation? What does the leadership need to do? How do you plan for it? How do you support it? And so on. So it's all management stuff, right? It's not what controls will we use, that's somewhere else. It's just how do we go about managing this thing. If you're going to be certified as compliant with this standard, you have to do everything that's listed there. You can't leave any out. Right? So it's the whole thing. So the context is about understanding your organisation and the purpose and how it relates to other parties. Leadership, they have to demonstrate their commitment to information security management by providing appropriate resources, so structure, people, money, that sort of stuff. Have a policy for information security, abide by the policy, assign roles to people. Make sure that there's enough money to do it. Make sure you've put competent people so people are trained for the roles they've got. Make sure that all of the people within your organisation, so it could be your employees or customers or clients or whatever, are aware of the policy and know what they need to do and what happens if they don't do it. So all of this stuff, how will you do risk assessment? How will you do risk treatment? How will you know if things are working? So the monitoring and all of that, that's all in this document. And the idea that if you find something that's not right, you'll take corrective action and that you'll cycle through that risk management process over and over. So that's 27001. It's about how do we manage. 27002 is what do we do. Okay, so 27002, it used to be, there's been standards along this line, 17799 or 4444 was a British standard originally. Basically, this is about what are the controls we put in place. So guidelines for information security standards, information security management, but this is the focus, selecting, implementing and managing the controls, taking into consideration your security environment. So there's a whole heap of controls. So it has a heap of clauses, 18. The first few are the same as before. What's the scope? Defining the terms. This is an important part though, because often the standards will use a term, and it'll be a word like risk, and they define exactly what they mean. And it might not be the same as a definition in a dictionary or something. So if you're looking at a standard, it's always worth checking first in the terms and definitions to make sure you understand exactly what they mean by the particular words they're using. Okay, the security control clauses, each clause is about a particular thing. It tells you what the objective is and then what are the considerations you need to make. Now 27001, you had to do absolutely everything that's in there. 27002 is different. You choose the controls, that you want to use. So this is pick and mix, right? Depending on your organisation, some of this might be irrelevant. Don't worry about that. Pick the parts that are relevant to your organisation. All right, so there's a set of things. There's stuff about information security policy we'll have a look at, how to organise, human resources, asset management, access control, stuff about crypto, physical and environmental security, operations, communications, supplier relationships, security management, business continuity management, compliance. So all of that stuff's in there. You can go through and just pick out the sections that are relevant to your organisation and do that. So if you're working somewhere, grab a copy of the standards, have a look through them and find the parts that are relevant for you. I just picked a few to highlight here. I picked this one, information security policy. So this is the objective for this is provide management direction and support for information security in accordance with business requirements and laws and regulations. In the part about context, when it says relevant laws and regulations, you actually have to know what laws apply to us. Okay, well, we're in Australia, so are there Australian federal laws? We're in Queensland. Is there state legislation that applies? We're in a particular industry. Are there regulations in this industry? So you have to know that sort of stuff. Anyway, so the management, and it's a management role, management should set a policy direction in line with their objectives, demonstrate support for commitment to information security by issuing and maintaining a policy. So the policy document has to be approved by the management, has to be published, has to be communicated to all of the employees of the organisation and anyone else that is going to be in contact, so the relevant parties, and it should say what their commitment is and what their approach to managing information security is. Should define information security, should say what the framework is for the control objectives, explain the risk assessment procedure. So lots of stuff there about it. Should define responsibilities for information security. So if we're thinking about an organisation like QUT, there might be different information security responsibilities for staff, for students, maybe for the IT people specifically. So it could be different groups there that get different responsibilities. And the last part is you should communicate this to users in a form that's relevant, accessible, and understandable to the intended reader. So where's QUT's information security policy? Communicated to users. How would they communicate it to you? You're here. You're using QUT information assets. Surely you should know. What's your guess? Somewhere, yeah. That thing called the MOP, the Manual of Policies and Procedures. Yep, it's in there somewhere. So it is communicated to you if you go there and find it. You get a chance to go there and find it in the tube. A little part of that says you should review this at planned intervals or significant changes, okay? Make sure it's still okay and effective. Significant changes, if something changes in your organisational environment, you acquire a new organisation like Marriott bought Starwood, right? Oh, that was a bit of a change. They automatically inherited all of that data and the problems that were ticking away inside it as well. Business circumstances, legal conditions. Sometimes the laws change over time. So in the last few years, there's been a lot of changes in privacy legislation in Australia and in Europe both. So that makes changes. Changes in the technical environment. So new technology that changes the way things work. It says here the policy should have an owner who has approved management responsibility for development, review and evaluation. So it doesn't mean the policy only applies to that person. It means you've specifically said your job is keep an eye on this. All right, so it doesn't get left out. There's stuff about organisation of information security internally, so making sure that roles and responsibilities are set out. Segregation of duties. So segregation of duties we'll talk about more when we talk about access control, but basically splitting things up so that one person does a subset of things, someone else does other things, and you can't overuse your rights there to do something nasty. How you'll be in contact with authorities, how you'll be in contact with special interest groups, what happens for project management, that it all gets focused on. There's a section about mobile devices and teleworking. That's a kind of odd phrase that you don't hear as much now as we used to. Mobile devices is pretty clear. Okay, so have a mobile device policy, thinking about people working with mobile devices. Where will they use them? They won't be in this office environment, right? They will be maybe out on the road. They might be in a hotel. They might be in a cafe. They might be at home. They might be sitting in a park under a tree. So unprotected environments, what do they need to do? What if they're out and then they go on a lunch break? Is it okay to leave their laptop in the car? Do they have to do anything with it? Does it have to be locked up? Can they have any software they want on it? Is that okay? Have you activated some kind of remote access? Can you remotely access the webcam? Can you remotely access it and wipe the device? So all sorts of things like that to think about with mobile devices. There's a big list, that's only a few things there. If that's you and you're thinking about an organisation where people are using mobile devices and you're thinking, oh, I know there's a few problems, I wonder if I've thought of them all, that's where you use the standard like a checklist. You get it out, you read through that section and go, did I think of that, did I think of that, did I think of that, all the way through. Yeah. Teleworking, so this is basically, oh, we're letting people work from elsewhere, maybe it's from home. How do they access stuff? So what policy do we have that protects the information that's accessed, processed, or maybe stored somewhere else off-site? If they're using stuff at home, what's their network at home? How have they got things configured? Do their kids play on this same machine or not? What sort of malware protection is there? Do they do regular updates? So lots of stuff there to think about as well. So that's one section about organisation. There's a section about human resources, because remember, people use information and information systems. And it's no surprise really the human resource part's split into three parts: prior to employment, during employment, termination or change of employment. So they're the three. Prior to employment, what are the sensible things? What role will you have in this organisation? What are your responsibilities? Are you competent to fulfil this role? Screening thing? Oh, background checks. Do you remember we had that example about the New Zealand defence scientist, chief defence scientist, the bogus one? So do the background checks. What are the terms and conditions? If you're going to be accessing information, maybe personal information, what are the terms and conditions? Can you use the company database to track down your old friend from school? Haven't seen them for a while, I wonder if they still live at that address. Is it okay to look it up? If, for example, you work in Queensland Police and you've spotted someone that you might want to date, can you do a background check on them before you go out on a date? Is that okay or not okay? So things like that, terms and conditions. If you're Queensland Police, it's not okay. During employment. So while people are working in the organisation, do they know what their responsibilities are? Do you provide information security awareness and training? If you're giving people a job to do or some technology to use, do they know how to use it appropriately? And is there some disciplinary process? If they're doing the wrong thing, what's going to happen then? So that's all stuff to think about. Lots of stuff in there about that. What happens when you sack someone? Or maybe they just left because they wanted to. They're going somewhere else. So this part talks about that, making sure employees, contractors and third parties exit an organisation in an orderly manner. That sounds like we're going very carefully down the fire escape, doesn't it? No one trip over. We don't want to have a stampede. But yeah, thinking about what happens. If someone leaves the organisation, are there ongoing security requirements? So while they work there, they did this process, they know that stuff, are they allowed to use it somewhere else or not? Are they allowed to discuss it or not? What's the legal issue? Oh, while they worked here, you gave them a phone and a laptop. Are they going to give those things back? Did they make a copy of anything? Are they allowed to? If they've got access, physical access to buildings or logical access, remote access, they can log into stuff. Do they give that back? Do they have to return their ID card, the key to the office or the coffee room or whatever? So all of that stuff. It all seems like common sense, but it doesn't always happen. So this is an example. It's a bit of an old example now, 2011. But it's interesting. US cloud storage provider is being sued. Why is it being sued? So this company, Cyberlink, was used by a Hawaiian, that's way too many I's, but Hawaiian TV show production and distribution company. So this company, We Are One, made a children's TV show, Zodiac Island. They had files, 2 years worth of work, hundreds of people, lots of animation, soundtracks, all of that stuff. So, you know, years of episodes of this TV show. They had it all stored in the cloud, this cloud service provider, Cyberlink. Cyberlink fired somebody. 1 month after he was given the sack, he got back into their servers, wiped out 304 gig of data. It was a full season of this TV show. Does that matter? 2 years of work, hundreds of people, dozens of companies. That's real dollars to replace, right? If you can. 1 month after being given the sack, why can he still access the system? That's not a hard thing to change. So remember we had this picture back here. Getting to it, sorry, it's taken me a while. This one that says, are there things that can dramatically reduce the risk and don't cost very much? When you're going to fire someone, remove all their accesses. Doesn't cost a lot, dramatically reduces the risk. So this guy actually got caught, went to court, not pleasant. Yeah, but there are plenty of organisations where things like that happen. It's not good. So it's just a reminder, think about that. Asset management, who's responsible for what? Do you even know what the assets are? So in your company, how many laptops do they own and where are they all right now? Oh, we own 17. There's 12 in the storeroom. I think Ali's got one. Don't know where the rest are. So that's probably not good, right? Ali says, what? Not me. Yeah, so know where your assets are. Information, software, physical assets, people who know things. Know about it, have an inventory, make people responsible for it, document what's acceptable in terms of using it, and make sure people know what's acceptable and what's not, okay? Information classification, this is part of when you're looking at information, what sort of information is it? It could be, this information is public. We don't care, this can go up on the website or, you know, we can put it out in the rubbish, it doesn't actually matter if people see this. Or it could be, well, this is top secret, we don't want anyone to know. This is for, you know, this small group of people only. So classify it. What's the value to the organisation? What are your legal requirements? You know, this can only be seen by these people. Is it sensitive information? So that depends on your organisation, what sensitive means. In terms of personal information, your HIV status, that would be sensitive, right? Criticality to the organisation. If you lose this, can you run without it or not? For you guys, when you're looking at your mobile phone, doing your security analysis for the mobile phone, you can think about these two things, sensitivity and criticality. So I already said before, one of the things that's critical for your phone is the operating system. If you don't have the operating system, your phone's really just a paperweight. What else? Do you have other information that's critical for you? Do you have sensitive information in your phone? So it might not be critical, but it might be, you know, you can operate without this, but it might be stuff that you really don't want, you know, disclosed. So have a think about that. Information labelling and handling, yeah, do you put that stamp, you know, confidential or top secret or whatever on the front cover? How do you do that electronically? Do they have warnings or no? Or version control, stuff like that. This part, media handling, this is not talking to the media, being on the news or Channel 9 or any of that stuff. This is about storage media. You know, have you got this on a USB? Have you got this on a CD? Is this in some removable storage? So what do you do with that kind of stuff? And the aim here is to prevent unauthorised disclosure. There was a story a little while ago. We had this one already. This is about the NASA laptop. So you remember this one? NASA had their laptop and it had the space station command stuff on it. Yeah, it got stolen and it hadn't, the data on it wasn't encrypted. Who cares? There were examples of people working in defence who, you know, stopped off in the Qantas lounge and tried to get a bit of extra work done while they were there, and then left a CD with some defence files on it in a machine in the Qantas lounge somewhere a few years ago. It's probably not good. So it's things like that. If you send stuff from place to place, do you use a courier? Do you go, we're sending it here, got to the other end? If you send, if you send stuff, do you check that it's actually going to the right place and you haven't mislabeled or misaddressed it? Access control, stuff about the requirements for it. User access management, so registering users, deregistering users. User authentication we'll talk about next week. That's pretty good. What responsibilities users have for that authentication information. So one example of user authentication might be, you know, when you log into QUT and you have to provide your QUT password. What are your obligations about that password? Are you allowed to share it with your friends? Not sure? So things like that. Are you allowed to write it down anywhere? Okay, so there's a section about that. Physical security. So this is talking about where things are located. The objective is preventing unauthorised access, damage and interference, preventing loss, damage, theft and compromise of assets. So it's all sorts of stuff. Establish secure areas with defined perimeters. That's maybe a bit harder than it sounds, but worth a try. So for us at QUT, we're a very public campus. People can come over the Goodwill Bridge and just wander through between the buildings. But there might be sections of buildings like where we are, where you actually have to swipe at the door to come into that bit. So you can control a little bit who's there. So there might be some appropriate barriers. There might be entry controls. Might be key locks and stuff too. Do you protect hardware to prevent theft? For a little while, there used to be a whole set of laptops that are available for students to use in the, that level 4 area, but they screwed them all to the benches because otherwise they might disappear. So thinking about that, protect hardware to prevent theft. Made them not very mobile, but... protect network cabling. So maybe someone is going to wiretap, or maybe they're going to chop the cables. There's possibilities. And there's a section there about equipment taken off-site. So there's plenty of examples where people have sent some dodgy piece of equipment out to be repaired, and the repairers have been able to access it and get access to the contents. So that might not be good. Sent off for disposal. We had the cabinet files one, remember? The actual filing cabinet with all the papers in it that went to auction. It went off to, ended up being in a second-hand shop. And someone bought it really cheaply. Operation security, heaps of stuff there. It's things that might be interesting to you. There's a section that talks about protecting stuff from malware. There's stuff that talks about making backups. There's things that talk about what you should log and monitoring of the logs. So that's an interesting thing. Lots of organisations log stuff, but they might have a limited storage for the logs and then they just overwrite it. So it's worth thinking about what time frame do you keep logs for, because if you're continually overwriting, the evidence you want might not be there anymore when something happens. The software that you're using, what control is there of that? So vulnerability management, you know from the tute that there are lots of vulnerabilities in software. So whose job is it to patch it and keep it up to date? And in some systems, you can't patch. You can't just turn it off and shut things down and do the repair. So that can be a bit tricky, depending on your environment. Okay, there's stuff about systems acquisition. So that's thinking over the life cycle and the decisions you'll need to make. Lots of stuff there about that. Stuff about supplier relationships. So this is really important now because lots of things are not done completely within an organisation. So you will have maybe someone supplying services for your organisation, whether that service is storage service or software or all sorts of different things. So you need to think about what's the security policy for that. What's in the supply chain? Who are you relying on? What are you relying on them for? Is that written into your agreements? So can you say legally you should have done this or not? Did you just not mention it? So there's a few examples for that. I don't know if anyone remembers this one from last year about PageUp. So PageUp basically was if you were applying for a job at lots of different places, Australia Post, Coles, Aldi, Attorney Generals, all sorts of organisations use that. So you put your job application in through this organisation. They were managing the service on behalf of all these other companies. They got breached. So PageUp, 2 million active users from 190 different countries. But what sort of information would you put in when you're applying for a job? It's quite a lot of stuff, right? Yeah. And all of that information potentially accessed by someone else. Now, that's not Australia Post's fault, but you were applying for the job with them. The information went somewhere else. How does that work? So it's about thinking about those arrangements. There's something here about Ticketmaster in the UK. They had a big breach last year. I think it went for about 4 months. But this got noticed because people, their credit card information got taken. So they get their credit card statement and there'd be things on there that they didn't do. Then they go to the bank and complain, I didn't make this purchase, I didn't make this purchase. And as they started investigating, a lot of people complaining had a Ticketmaster purchase in their list. So that's like the common theme. And then they go, oh, maybe something happened at Ticketmaster. It wasn't actually Ticketmaster's breach, but they had a third party who looked after some aspect of customer data, and it was the third party that got breached. But the reputational damage is for them. So how do you manage those relationships? What are the things you need to think about? So basically this standard 27002 goes through heaps of different things, and then that tells you, okay, these are some of the things that you should consider. So if you're worried about missing something, look at that section of the standard. Use it like a checklist. Information security incident manage. So this is when you have a security incident. So what does that mean? A threat and a vulnerability coincided. You have an incident. Might be an attack, it might just be an incident, but you're going to have to do something. So how do you manage the incident? You couldn't stop it happening, it's happened now, what are you going to do? How will you report it? Who will you need to tell? What can you learn from it? And what evidence can you collect for what happens afterwards? Is it your fault? What are you going to have to do? Do you have to notify clients or customers or whatever? Do you have to pay for something for the damages? Okay, so we've talked about we need to manage information security. It's really a risk management exercise. You've got to make some trade-offs and pick your things, but do it in an informed way. So 27005 was the Information Security Risk Management Standard, and I have really quickly breezed over what's in these other two standards. 27001, that says this is how you would set up an information security management system. So it's how the management system would work. 27002 says, if you got this problem, think about these controls. If you got this one, think about that. For this situation, think about that. So 27002 It's a set of all the considerations you should have to make for the various different things. And you just do the ones in 27002 that are appropriate for your organisation. So that's the one, even as an individual, 27002 has value for you. Have you thought about these things? Okay, last question I've got on the slides there is whose responsibility is it? If it's in an organisation, you've got lots of different groups. You've got your execs, your management, so Chief Executive Officer, you might have a Chief Security Officer, you might have a Chief Information Officer, you might have a Chief Information Security Officer. Is it their job? At QT, we have these security people. You see them walking around in their uniform and they've got their little badgy things and, you know, walkie-talkies and stuff. Is it their job? They're good at some of it. They have really defined procedures. If something happens, like, you know, we had the building evacuation stuff up there. If there was a fire or something, we have to get the fireys in. They know what to do. They do the liaison. They bring them in, make sure they get to the right spot. If we call the police for something or the ambulance, they know how to handle that. If it's someone with malware on a USB, maybe it's not their thing, right? We have a whole heap of IT staff as well. We have users, you, us. There are contractors here. Stuff gets outsourced. Heaps and heaps of people. And the interesting part of information security is anybody's actions can impact everyone else. So it's actually not one person that's responsible. Really need everyone on board for this, or things are still going to go wrong. And maybe they still are anyway, but, you know, got to try. Okay, so getting to the end of the story. So information security management, it's about controlling risk. So thinking about that risk management stuff. Identify the risks, analyse the risks, evaluate, match it up with your own criteria. Will you need to apply some treatment, yes or no? So have a controlled process that you follow for risk management. Don't just go, oh, gee, I read that in the paper, that sounds scary, better do something about that one. And then the next day, oh, that's scary, I'll do something about that, right? You'll be all over the shop and maybe contradictory. So think about the process. The standards are useful, guidelines to best practice. These are the standards that we have talked about in this lecture. They're all Australian standards, but they're all the same as the ISO standards with those numbers. So if you're not Australian and you're going to be working somewhere else in the near future, it doesn't hurt to look at the Australian standards because you'll see similar things in the other ones. If you're American, check for the NIST documents as well because they'll be useful to you over there. Some of these things I put here useful for individuals as well as organisations. 27002 I think is the one with most value for individuals because it's just, you know, have you thought about these things? The other thing is for you as an individual, you don't actually have total control of your information because you keep providing it to all these organisations, right? And what are they doing with it? You have no idea. You hope that they're following some kind of good information security management practice. So you hope that the organisations who've got your information are doing this stuff right. I hope they are too. So they've got my information as well. Okay, so risk management, you need to have an informed view. So don't just run out across the road, at least check for traffic before you run out. And hopefully then you'll make appropriate decisions and there'll be minimal damage. Now, a few other things. A reminder, there will be a weekly online quiz this week, same as every other week in the semester for CAB 240. It should become available at 6 o'clock. And it is open until Sunday, just before midnight. Once you start the quiz, you have 15 minutes to do it, but it's only 5 multiple choice questions. If you've left it to the last minute and you haven't got time to think, click through and guess. Okay, so that's my, reminder of that. Now, I have put up the first part of the mobile security analysis as well. It's under assessment task 1, problem-solving task or whatever it's called. Anyway, wherever the weekly quizzes are, next time you look for the weekly quiz, you'll see a section underneath that. It says mobile phone security investigation. So basically, that task is doing this risk management, but for your circumstances and your mobile phone, okay? Now that sounds pretty complicated, so we've restricted it a bit. You don't have to do a really exhaustive risk analysis. But yeah, have a look at the task requirements are there. We've given you some guidelines, you know, write a page on this, write 2 pages on this. Don't write a 100-page document because Ali does not want to mark that, okay? So we want to make it fairly concise. The part about the context, so think about your phone. You could do this now already. You know everything for this part. What phone are you using? What capabilities does it have? What's enabled on it? Bluetooth or whatever. What cameras does it have? So all sorts of stuff there. Write a description. How do you use your phone? What sort of data do you store on it? What do you store elsewhere? How do you use your phone to interact with that? The risk assessment part, we have really limited it because there are lots of risks and we don't want you to write about all of them, but we want you to choose, yeah, that's good. We want you to choose one thing for each of 4 different things. So I want you to start looking for articles that talk about security for mobile phones around operating systems, around applications that might be on your phone, around user behaviour, what do people do that is risky with their phones, and physical threats. So that's all in the task. You can have a look about that. When you're looking at articles, you've got to provide a summary, and we've given you a template to use, so you just need to fill in the template, and then that's that section done. So you're going to do that 4 times. I've given you one example of using the template and filled it out, but the article I chose was from like 2014 or something. We're going to be really strict with you. You need to use a current article. That means the article has to be published after July 2018. If you use an article that's very interesting, but it's from 2016, the markers are going to go, oh, quick, 0, move on. So be aware of that, right? Current articles, you're going to have to do a bit of reading. When you read the article and look at the template, if you can't find enough information in the article to fill that out properly, don't use that article, okay? Because we won't be able to give you a good mark if you haven't provided all of the information. So find an article that has enough information for you to give a good summary. And there's a marking criteria up there. You can have a look at that too. Okay, so that's the first part. That's the sort of 10% starter on that. It's due in not the end of this week, but 2 weeks after that. So you've got 2.5 weeks. So don't leave it too late. So that's my reminders of tasks to be working on for your assessment. Do the weekly quiz. That's a quick activity. Start this security analysis. That'll take you a bit longer, so don't leave it to the last minute. Okay, see you next week.